Hello and welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of the Analyst podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator. Join us now as we hear from leading IT industry analysts on how to make the best of a hybrid IT journey to successful digital business transformation. Our next interview examines the growing need for proper rationalizing of what apps, workloads, services, and data should go where across a hybrid IT continuum. Managing hybrid IT necessitates not only a choice between public cloud and private cloud, but a more granular approach to picking and choosing what assets go where based on performance, costs, compliance, and business agility. Here to report on how to begin to better assess what IT variables should be managed and thoughtfully applied to any cloud model is our guest. And we're here with Mark Peters. He's Practice Director and Senior Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Dana. Good to be with you.
We're delighted to have you. Well, now that cloud adoption is gaining steam, it may be time to step back and assess what works and what doesn't. Yeah, I think in past IT adoption patterns, we've seen a rapid embrace that sometimes ends with at least a temporary hangover. Sometimes it's complexity or runaway or unmanaged costs or even usage patterns that can't be controlled. So, Mark, is it too soon to begin assessing best practices and identifying ways to hedge against any ill effects from a runaway adoption of cloud?
You probably don't want an answer that just says no, do you? Because that wouldn't be much of a conversation. But the short answer, Dana, is no. Although, and we might come back at this a number of ways, I think it's not that the world is that different. I mean, there are changes going on. I get that. But when I say the world, I mean the IT world. It's not that the IT world is that different. It's just that we have more different tools, and that is really what hybrid comes down to, available to us. So it's not that those tools themselves demand a new way of doing things. They offer the opportunity to continue to think about what you want. But, if I have one repeated statement as we go through this, it will be that, it's not about focusing on the tools, it's about focusing on what you're trying to get done. You just happen to have more different tools now.
Well, we hear sometimes that as high up as boards of directors are telling people to go cloud first or just dump IT altogether. That strikes me, at least, as a bit of an overreaction. If we're looking at tools as to what they do best, is cloud that good that we can actually go cloud first or cloud only?
I guess it depends whom you're speaking to and what your MBO is, doesn't it? Because you do see increasingly different people outside of IT becoming involved in the decision. When I say outside of IT, I probably mean outside of the operational side of IT. So certainly you get the application groups involved. You're right, you do get boards. You do get other functions involved in making demands. And because the cloud can be so easy to consume, you do see people just running off and, deploying some SaaS model or maybe infrastructure as a service because it looked easy to do and they didn't want to wait for their internal IT to make the change. I think coming back to what you're asking, running away from IT completely is probably not a good idea. Internal IT, I mean, on-premises IT, is probably not going to be a good idea for most organizations for at least a considerable chunk of their workloads. And again, all the research we do, I don't know if you see the same stuff, but all the research we do says that, the world is hybrid for, it's always hard to date these things or put timescales on them, but certainly for as far ahead as we can see.
Oh, I certainly agree with that. I think hybrid is the catchword of the day. But that begs the further question of, if it is a mix of things, how do I determine the correct mix? And if it's a correct mix between just a public cloud or a private cloud, how do I then properly adjust to considerations about applications as opposed to data, as opposed to bringing in services and APIs when they're the best fit? How do we start to rationalize this better? Because I think we're starting to get to the point where we need to at least take some maturity in terms of the consumption on this.
Sure, but can I go back just a second? I often talk about something which I call the assumption gap. And the assumption gap is just, that moment where we move from one side where it's okay to ask lots of questions about something, in this case in IT, and then on the other side of this gap or chasm, to use a well-worn phrase, is where it's not okay to ask anything because you'll show you don't know what you're talking about. And that assumption gap seems to happen imperceptibly and very fast at some moment that, I don't quite know how we get there, but you certainly go from it's okay to ask to no, you look stupid if you ask. So the reason I want to mention this is I think it's worth spending a moment on, so what is hybrid IT? I think we fall into the trap of allowing ourselves to believe that having some on-premises workloads and applications and some off-premises workloads and applications is hybrid IT. I do not think it is. It's using a couple of tools for different things, but again, an analogy I find works, I don't know what you think of this one, Dana, but is, that's like having a Prius and a big diesel or gas, F-150 in your garage and saying, I've got two hybrid vehicles. No, you've got one of each, or some of each. And so I think we see all too often, just because someone has put something off an application or, let's say, a backup off into the cloud, oh, yeah, well, I'm hybrid. No, you're not really. The cloud is an approach. It's not a thing per se. It's another way of, as I said earlier, it's another tool that you have in the IT arsenal. So to come back to, I think, what was your second question, if I can actually remember two questions at once, it's how do you start figuring what goes where? I'm not apologetic about saying I don't think there are simple answers, because it would be just as sensible a question to say, well, what should go on flash, or what should go on disk, or what should go on tape, or what should go on paper, although the last answer might be not much these days, although I'm not sure we ever achieve paperless. But anyway, my point being, the decisions are situational to individual companies, to the stage of that company's life, to the budgets they have. And they're not only situational, they're also dynamic. And I want to give a couple of, if you like, very easy examples, because I think they will stick with people. Number one is you take something like email, pretty popular application, everyone runs email. Yeah, everyone uses email. In some organizations, that is the crucial application. They cannot run without it. Probably what you and I do would fall into that category. But there are other businesses where it's far less important than the factory running or the delivery vans getting out on time. So they would have different applications that are way more important than email. And this is an old story, but one I always liked, because it just shows how different things can be in different industries and over time. I don't know if you know this one, Dana, but when IM first came out, Yahoo IM is the messaging text, came out to be precise. They used to do their maintenance between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. because when it first came out, it was just a tool to chat to your friends at night. And now you have, again, businesses that rely on that. So clearly, the ability to instant message and text between us is now crucial. I mean, things like the stock exchange in Chicago runs on, I think, Yahoo probably, but certainly IM's very important to it. So again, I'm going in a circle and telling a story. The answer is not that you or I have the ability to tell any given company, well, X application should go on site and Y application should go off site or into the cloud, a cloud, because it will vary between businesses and vary across time. I'm droning on a bit here. I promise I'll stop in a second. I mean, clearly there are some general statements one can make. If something is mission critical or high risk, it is more likely that you'll want, at least for now, the feeling of security, I'm picking my words very carefully, of having it on site. But the extent to which, full production apps are being moved or including the cloud is growing every day. And certainly, again, that's what our research shows us. So the quick answer is, and I did say there's one thing I'll repeat a number of times in this conversation, the quick answer is you've got to figure out what you're trying to get done before you figure out what you're going to do it with.
Well, very good. Well, before we go into learning how organizations can better know themselves and therefore understand the right mix for themselves and their business challenges, let's learn a little bit more about you. Mark, tell us about yourself, your organization there at ESG. How long have you been an IT industry analyst?
Oh, okay, sure. Well, the astute listener will spot that I'm not from Texas. I grew up in my working life in the UK and then in Europe, working on the vendor side of IT. I grew up in storage and haven't really escaped it, although these days, clearly, as my title would indicate, I run a practice, and we call that practice infrastructure, because the integration, the interoperability between the various elements of infrastructure has become more important than the individual components within it. I stayed on the vendor side for many years, working in the UK, then in Europe, and then that's how I come to be in Colorado, which is where I am, and I joined ESG 10 years ago.
Well, great. So it's interesting that you raised the storage in the example of whether it should be flash or spinning media or tape. And it seems to me that maybe we could learn from what we've seen happen in a sort of hybrid environment within storage and extrapolate a bit as to how that pertains to a larger IT hybrid undertaking. Is there something about the way we've had to adjust to different types of storage and do that intelligently with the thought of performance and cost and the business objectives all in mind? I'll give you a chance to perhaps go along with my analogy or shoot it down. Can we learn from what's happened in storage and apply that to a larger hybrid IT model?
Well, so the quick answer to your question is absolutely we can. Again, the cloud is a different approach. It is a very beguiling and useful business model, but it's not a panacea. I really don't believe it ever will become a panacea. Now, that doesn't mean to say it won't grow. It is growing. It's huge. It's significant. You look at the recent announcements from the big cloud providers. I mean, they are at tens of billions of dollar run rates. So you don't do that by accident. People aren't using it by mistake. It's very, very valuable. But to your point, I think it should be viewed as part of I'm reticent to use these exact words, but I think they're helpful. It's part of a hierarchy or a tiering of IT. Now, the reason I'm hesitant is because I don't want to suggest that cloud sits at the bottom of some hierarchy or tiering. That's not my intent. But it is another choice of another tool. And again, let's be very, very clear about this. There isn't a cloud out there. One of the most frustrating things in not just casual, social conversations, but sometimes in IT conversations, is that people talk about the cloud as if it exists as one thing. It does not. Part of the reason hybrid IT is so challenging is you're not just choosing between on-prem and the cloud. You're choosing between on-prem and many clouds, and you might want to have a multi-cloud approach as well. We see that increasingly. I'm sure you see that too. And those various clouds have various attributes. Some are better at others and different things. And so it is exactly parallel to what you were talking about in terms of, what server you use, what storage you use, what speed you use for your networking. Anything else you use to run IT is, I believe, exactly parallel to the decisions you should make about which cloud and to what extent you deploy which cloud. In other words, all the things you said at the beginning, cost, risk, requirements, performance. I just think the problem is, and you see it many times in IT, you see it in the world as well, is, I can't avoid this cliche because, again, I think it just conveys it so well, but people get so distracted by bright, shiny objects that, that is the answer to everything. What we should be looking for is not bright, shiny objects, but, excuse the pun there, but it's bright, shiny outcomes. Only because I think alliteration lets people remember these things. But that's what we should be looking for. So you focus on the outcome that you want, then you figure out how to get it. You should not be sitting down, MBOs aside, and saying, how do I get to 50% of my data off-site? I don't think that's a sensible approach to business.
All right. Well, given that it's a very
Anything to do with the question you asked? I hope it was.
Well, yes, no, that was fine. And I agree that lessons learned in how to best utilize a hybrid storage environment, rationalizing that, bringing more intelligence, software defined, making the network through hyperconvergence, for example, being more of a consideration than an afterthought. All these things sort of, I think, illustrate where we're going on a larger scale or at a higher abstraction, as you point out. So, but going back to the idea that an organization is particular, that their specific business goals, their specific legacy and history of IT use, their specific way of using applications and pursuing business processes and fulfilling their obligations. How do you know in your organization enough to then start rationalizing the choices, making business choices and IT choices in conjunction? So I'm asking about, have we lost the visibility given that there's so many different tools that we can use now for doing IT?
I think yes. There is I think the answer is yes. By definition, and just to throw the question back sort of rhetorically at you, is, if you can't see it, you don't know about it. So to some degree, we are assuming that we don't know everything that's going on. But I think, anecdotal and prima facie evidence suggests that what you propose is absolutely true. The challenge, I think, if we step away a second and assume that I've beaten home the point about starting with the outcomes, not the tools that you use to achieve those outcomes, but to move to your point of, but how do you know what you've even got? Because it's become so easy to consume in different ways. A lot of people talk about, shadow IT. You've got all this sprawl of different way of doing things. And so I think this leads to two requirements. Number one is that gaining visibility point. And as I say, ironically, it's a challenge with shadows because you've got to even know what's in the shadows. You can't, by definition, see in there. So that's a tough thing to do. And even once you've found out what's going on, and maybe this is the second step, is how do you gain control? Control not for control's sake, I don't think, but it's only by knowing all the things you're trying to do and how you're trying to do them across an organization that you can then optimize them. So again, it's an old adage, but you know that thing about you can't manage what you can't measure. You also can't improve things that can't be managed or measured. And so, number one, you've got to find out what's in the shadows, what it is you're trying to do. This is assuming you know what you're aiming towards. And then you have to, and I think the next, if you like, I'll call it battleground for sophisticated IT users and vendors. Well, it's not a battleground for the users, it's a choice for users, but a battleground for vendors is to find a way to help their customers manage everything, control everything, optimize everything. Because just doing the first and finding out what you've got and finding out you're in a mess doesn't help you. There's a TV ad, isn't there, I think, which is quite good right now, which is about, I don't know if you have it where you live or where everyone listening to this lives, but it's basically putting the distinction between an alert when your bank account is being messed with or actually doing something about it. Or in this case, I think they use a bank robbery. And, they look at the security guard. He says, well, I'm not actually a security guard. I'm just a security alert. So just being told that you're in the middle of a bank robbery doesn't really help you if you can't do anything about it. So again, visibility is not the same as solving. So just to net that off again, the point is not just finding out what you've got, that's point one, but actually being able to do something about it, because the level of complexity, the range of applications that most people are running these days, the extremely high levels of expectation, both in speed, in flexibility, in performance, and so on, mean that you cannot, even with visibility, fix things by hand. You and I grew up in an era where a lot of things were done on whiteboards and Excel spreadsheets. That doesn't cut it anymore. So you've got to find a way to manage that is automated, because manual management, again, just will not cut it, even if you know everything that you're doing wrong.
Yes, I agree 100% that the automation, in order to deal with the scale, the complexity, the requirements for speed, the fact that you're going to be dealing with workloads and IT assets that are off of your premises means you're going to be doing this programmatically. Therefore, you're in a better position to use automation. Now, I'd like to go back again to storage. When I first took a briefing...
Well, why not you? I like going back to storage. Best thing ever.
Yes, right. When I first took a briefing with Nimble Storage, which is now part of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, I was really impressed with the degree to which they used intelligence to solve the problems, the economic and performance problems of hybrid storage. And so given the fact that we can apply more intelligence nowadays, that the cost of gathering and harnessing data, the speed at which it can be analyzed, the degree to which that analysis can be shared is all very fortuitous, that just as we need greater visibility and that we have a bigger problem to solve across hybrid IT, we also have some very powerful tools. So tell me a little bit, Mark, about whether my assumption that what worked for storage intelligence will work for hybrid IT intelligence is fair, and also what degree should we expect more and more, dare I say, artificial intelligence and machine learning will be brought to bear on this hybrid IT management problem?
Yeah, so I think it is a very, what would be the right word here? It's a very straightforward and good parallel. Storage has become increasingly sophisticated. I've been in and around the storage business now for more than 3 decades. So the joke is always that, I remember when a megabyte was a lot, let alone a gigabyte, a terabyte, an exabyte. I'd go for a whole day class when I was on the sales side of the business just to learn something like dual pathing or got cache. It was so exciting 30 years ago, and yet these days, it's a bit like cars. I mean, you and I used to use a choke, or, we'd have to really go and check everything on the car before we went on a 100-mile journey. Now we press a button and it better work in any temperature at any speed. And I think some of that, again, we demand so much of our cars, just to stretch that analogy, so I'm mixing cars and storage and we'll make it all come back together with hybrid IT. These are areas where it's better to do things in an automated fashion. There's always one person in every crowd I talk to who still believes a stick shift is more economic and faster than an automatic car. And it might be true for 1 in 1,000 people, and they probably drive cars for a living. But for most people, 99% of people, 99.9% of the time, an automatic will both get you there faster and will be more efficient in doing so. The same became true of storage. To get back to the parallel you're drawing. It became far too complex. There used to be, again, something you might remember. We used to talk about, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's good to have a history lesson occasionally. We used to talk about how much storage could one capacity planner manage. That's just become old hat now because you don't talk about it in those terms. Storage has moved to be, how do we serve applications? How do we serve up the right place in the right time, the data to the right person at the right time, at the right price and so on. And we don't just choose what goes where or who gets what. We set the parameters, and we then allow both the machine from an automated fashion, and these days increasingly, I can guarantee if you talk to 10 storage companies, 10 of them will talk to you about machine learning and AI, because they know they've got to bring that in to make that execution of change ever more efficient and ever faster, because they're just dealing with tremendous scale, and you could not do it even with simple automation that still involves humans. Now let's move on to that. So, we use cars as a social analogy, use storage as an IT analogy, and absolutely that's where IT, hybrid IT, is going. It will be self-managing and self-optimizing. And perhaps one word just to make it very crystal clear, it will not be a recommending tool, it will be an executing tool, because there is not time to wait for you and me to finish our coffee and have a think about it and get our whiteboard out and realize we haven't got the yellow marker and we can't do something, and it's too late. So it's not just about the knowledge and the visibility, to tie it to what we were talking about before, it's about the execution and the automated change. But yes, I think your analogy is a very good one for how the IT world will change.
Now, if the benefit of your being in business over your competitor is in how you execute and optimize and perhaps exploit intelligence capabilities, the newer ones, because it seems to me that commoditization is also part of cloud, right? If everyone's using AWS, then everyone's using the same services for storage and server and serverless and development. So how do you differentiate, right? So it seems to me that how you optimize, the way in which you gain the visibility, know your own business, apply the lessons of optimization will, in fact, be a deciding factor in your success, no matter what business you're in. So it seems to me that the tools you pick for visibility and execution and optimization and intelligence will be the new real, differentiator among major businesses. And so where do we look to find those tools? Are they in development? Do we know what ones we should expect? How will organizations know where to look for the next differentiating tier of technology when it comes to optimizing hybrid IT?
I think and I'm just going to drag both of us back, if you like, not that we're too far away, and hopefully we've still got a tenuous link to today. We're talking years hence for us to be in the nirvana that we're discussing. So I think by the way, the answer is completely correct, although the extent to which there'll be a lack of differentiation, I just want to push back slightly on what you said, would only apply if everyone was using exactly the same tools and services from AWS, to use your example, completely. The expectation, assuming we have a hybrid world, is they will have kept some application maybe on premise, or they might be using some specialist regional or vertical, as in vertical industry cloud for something else, because there's a particular mix that they want to get for their business. So I think that's one of the areas where you can differentiation. It's how do you get this balance? So that's one important thing. And then back to what you were talking about, where are those tools? How do you look? How do you make the move? I'll give one very specific thing here, is because we have to get from here to there. It's all very well talking about the future, and doesn't that sound great and perfect? But you have to get there. We do quite a lot of research at ESG, and we find, I will throw just a couple of numbers at you, which I think help to explain how you might do this. We already find that the multi-cloud deployment or option is a significant element within the hybrid IT world. So asking people about this, and this is recent in the last few months, we found that around 3/4 of the respondents already had more than one cloud provider, and around 40% had 3 or more. So you're getting diversity, whether by default or design, really doesn't matter at this point. We'll hope it's by design. But nonetheless, you're certainly getting people using different cloud providers to take advantage of the specific capability that each offers. The other thing, though, that is coming back to the how do you get there from here, because you can't just plonk down some new magic piece of software and everything's okay, because it might not work with what you've already got, the legacy systems, the applications that you've already got. So one of the other questions we ask people is, how do they prefer this improved management that will, to, in some form or fashion, embrace their legacy systems to be developed? 3/4 of them, this is finally to get to the point, 3/4 of them want the hybrid management to be from the infrastructure up, if you like, meaning that it's going to be based on their managing their existing infrastructure and extending management, if you like, up or out into the cloud, rather than starting with some cloud management approach and extending it back down into their infrastructure. So the net of all that is what I see is people wanting to enhance what they've currently got so that it can embrace the cloud. In the same way, let's use the example earlier, the storage example seems to be working here. It's enhancing your choice of tiers so it embraces Flash, for example. And rather than just deploying something and hope all your current, not just your physical infrastructure, but your application infrastructure, if I can use that term, will work with. And because we already see, as you heard me say, we see a lot of people going to a multi-cloud hybrid deployment model, that makes entire sense. You're not just going to pick one cloud model and hope that will come sort of backwash and make everything else work. You start with what you've got and you gradually embrace these alternative tools.
Well, it seems to me that we're sort of creating a list of requirements for what we'd like to see develop in terms of this management and optimization and automation capability, maybe 2 or 3 years out. but we're not seeing that quite yet. The vendors, like, say, Microsoft, is just now coming out with the ability to manage between their hybrid infrastructure, their private cloud offering, Azure Stack, and their public cloud, Azure. We haven't seen yet any of the cloud providers say, we're going to help you mix and match workloads among and between our competitors. So where would we look for that breed of fully inclusive, fully intelligent tools that will allow us to get to where we want to be in a couple of years? I've heard of one. It's from HPE. It's called Project New Hybrid IT Stack. I don't know that much about it, but I'm thinking that HPE can't be the only company, we can't be the only analysts that are seeing what, to me, is a market opportunity you could drive a truck through. This is going to be a big problem to solve.
Sure, and I think I will answer your question. I also want to just make a comment. I think the reason that there's a few reasons it's not moving that fast, or perhaps not as fast as we would magically like, is, although I'll tell you, we'll look back in a decade and say, wow, that was fast. It's just, we're always anxious for things to happen by next Tuesday, and when it takes 3 months, 6 months, or a year, it seems like forever. It's not really. There are many organizations, frankly, for whom this would not be a good commercial decision because they don't play in multiple areas, or they're not, if you like, system providers. That's why someone like HPE is interested or capable or focused on doing this. You rightly point out, and so, in very straightforward terms, many organizations, many vendor organizations, I mean to say, are either focused on the cloud side of the business, and there's some very big names we know there, or on the on-premises side of the business. And embracing both is something that is not just difficult for them to do, but really not top of their want-to-do list before they're absolutely forced to. And so from that perspective, the ones that we see doing this, I think, fall into two camps. There is the trendy new startup, and there are some of those around. The problem is, it's really tough for imagining, particularly large organizations that are going to risk that. They'd probably even start to try and write it themselves, which is possible, unlikely, but possible. Where I think we will get the lift for this side of the business from. You talked about New Stack. There are some of the other big organizations, Oracle, IBM, spring to mind in terms of being able to embrace both on-premise and off-premise. But at the end of the day, you'll notice the similarity between those that we've mentioned is that they're, I think, what I would call systems companies. So at the end of the day, they win by delivering the best overall solution and package to their clients, not individual components within it. And by individual components, I include cloud or on-premise or an application. I think if you are looking for, and this, I'm going to turn a phrase here, which again, I think it helps explain it, but is not one I want anyone to adopt. But if you're going to look for a successful hybrid IT deployment or tool, you probably have to look at a hybrid IT vendor. That last part, I think, is self-descriptive, but not one I want to start using.
Clearly not a big grouping. We're not going to be sloughing through RFPs from 50 or 60 different companies to find some solutions there.
Well, you won't need to. I mean, and again, I hate to harp on about age, but, you and I are cracking on a bit here, and we've seen a few things. And one of the terms that has been used, I'll say forever, as long as you and I can remember, which could be yesterday, is about IT becoming a utility. And the parallel there is most people don't have a choice of, on a practical level, or even sometimes commercially, you don't have a choice of many, whether it's, physical supplier like electricity or water, or stuff that comes over the air like the internet, or it could come down from a satellite. But you don't tend to have a choice of that many. And I think realistically, looking not that many years ahead, decades, not centuries, years and decades, not centuries, there will not be that many choices when it comes to IT provision.
All right, well, before we sign off, Mark, any thoughts about what organizations should be thinking about in terms of how to become proactive rather than reactive to the hybrid IT environment and the complexity and, to me, obvious need for better management going forward?
I did think about this a little, so if it sounds cliched, it's because I did think about, you're bound to ask me to wrap things up at the end. And it's repeating some of what I said before. It's not, everything we've talked about, not hybrid IT, but the on-premise or the off-premise, or how you manage these things, how you gain visibility. Those are all parts of the, if you like, the solution or the answer. The real thing, we mentioned it a couple of times, but I do think it's where we should finish because it's absolutely crucial, is that you don't start with those bright, shiny objects. You don't start with, how can I deploy more cloud? How can I do hybrid IT? Those are not good questions to ask. Good questions to ask are, what do I need to do as an organization? How do I make my business more successful? How does everything in IT become a part of answering those questions? In other words, drum roll, it's the thinking about ends, not means. And all too often in IT, I might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I've been around it 30 years, you see people start with the means and try and apply it to the ends and not the other way around.
Well, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring the growing need for proper rationalization of what apps, workloads, and services, as well as data, should go where across a hybrid IT continuum. And we've learned how managing hybrid IT necessitates making better choices between clouds, but maybe thinking about the ends rather than the means, even as we get to more granular tools and have even more options for how to accomplish things. So a big thank you to our guest. We've been here with Mark Peters, Practice Director and Senior Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group. Thanks so much, Mark.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And Mark, if our listeners and readers want to follow you and gain more of your excellent insights, how should they do that?
The best way is to go to our website, take a pen, because it's not just three initials, but it's the initials of the company, ESG, -global.com. And there, the reason I recommend that is because then you can find not just me and all my contact details and materials, but those of all my colleagues and the many areas we cover and study in this wonderful world of IT.
Excellent. And also thank you to our audience for joining us for this BriefingsDirect Voice of the Analyst discussion on how to better manage the hybrid IT journey to digital business transformation. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise sponsored interviews. Follow me on Twitter at Dana_Gardner and find more hybrid IT focused podcasts at www.briefingsdirect.com. Once again, thank you for joining. Please pass this content on to your IT community if you found it valuable, and please come back next time.